Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of November of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's start with Kiev, with the global Ukrainian events, updates or something. The Ukrainian special forces reported that during the previous months the Russians managed to concentrate around 1,000 missiles. 1,000 missiles. The Russians haven't been attacking the Ukrainians probably for the previous 2.5 months. According to the Ukrainian sources, the Russians have production around 100 missiles per month. Obviously, the Russians can create more than 100 because they always increase and develop their production, the possibilities. And furthermore, the Ukrainians just reported about missiles, and nobody knows exact number of drones that the Russians also have prepared before the winter military campaign. You know that today we got a lot of updates about Zelensky and about Zaluzhny clashes, not clashes but strikes and fightings in the open media. We got a lot of updates from fake Zaluzhny, who was asking the Ukrainians to turn their weapon and start movement in direction of Kiev to make a military coup. We see that the Russians have already completed the concentration and collection of missiles, and obviously the Russians are going to finish the special military operation not on the ground, not by taking Avdiivka, not by storming Kharkiv. The Russians are planning to finish the special military operation with the military coup, basically with another Maidan in Kiev, where the Russians will try to force to collect as much as possible people and to force them to change the power in Ukraine. And the base of that, the Russians are planning to use the energy crisis. Obviously, the Russians are going to black out Ukraine, to shut Ukrainians down, and to force people, to force Zelensky to stop this war, or something like this. Furthermore, today we got another update from the United States of America, from the Washington Post. They reported that the explosions on the Nord Stream were prepared by Ukrainian colonel who is responsible and who is under control of Zaluzhny. So basically, the United States of America, obviously, they have the necessary information regarding the Russian plans. They maybe they understand that the chances that the Russians are able to complete everything they're planned is around 100%. And now they try to, let's say, to drop Ukraine, to, let's say, to make a barrier between them and Ukrainians, and to provide the necessary information that we, the United States of America, don't have any connections with Ukraine. We were not responsible for anything during the special military operation. The only thing we were responsible for is that we were providing the Ukrainians weapons and bullets, and that's it. So, as I understand, the end of November and the beginning of December is going to be very interesting. Not just very interesting, it's going to be very interesting from the historical perspective. Another important updates are coming from the ground, and for this purpose let's move to the Kupiansk direction. We got the video from the 57th Motorized Brigade. I remind you that 57th Motorized Brigade used to, this is the 57th Brigade, this one, used to be located on North Artyomovsk direction in the vicinity of Orekhov-Vasilievka, Dubovo-Vasilievka, and there was pretty calm days for them while the main forces were fighting for Avdiivka, for Bakhmut, for Artyomovsk, for Klishchiivka. That brigade was located in the villages. They were drinking a lot of vodka, they were feeling themselves pretty comfortable. But during the Russian offensive operation in Kupiansk, the Ukrainian military authorities were forced to redeploy this brigade to the combat line to Kupiansk with the purpose to slow down the Russians in the vicinity of Pershatravnevo, Liman I, Sinkovka, and so on. And basically that brigade was defeated. And this this person, probably some officer or the higher rank officer of, not the higher rank, but something like a sergeant or something like this, maybe higher, was talking about the difficult situation in brigade, and at the end of that video he told that 57th Brigade, or at least his battalion or his campaign, refused to continue any offensive operation on this direction without proper support, proper supply, without support of air forces, without support of artillery, and so on. So he understands that for him it's better to go to jail but not to return back to the zero line. Furthermore, he added that when the Russians start offensive operation. Most of his forces, of his people, took a decision to run away, and they were running away crossing the minefields, and they didn't have the map of minefields, and a lot of soldiers, people from his brigade or battalion, basically died on the minefields as a result of all those explosions. So, but the most important thing that this is not the first video of such type. I'll remind you that just a few days ago we got another video from Avdiivka direction, and I'll remind you that when talking about Avdiivka, that video was published on the 10th of November, and that video was published by 110th Mechanized Brigade. Of course, the number of forces on this video is much less than the force of 57th of that video, but the story was the same. The situation on the front lines, the unnecessary storm attempts of Terikon, the hundreds of losses of Ukrainian soldiers, no support, no supply, nothing. The commanders left the combat line, left Avdiivka, and basically there are two videos for 3 days of a very bad situation of the Ukrainian forces on the ground. Of course, there are very high chances that this is Russian special operation to show the difficult situation, or maybe this is not true and this is the real updates and real comments and real situation of Ukrainian army. Furthermore, I'll remind you that on the 20th of November we are going to see another meeting in Ramstein where the Western countries will determine what kind of weapon they're planning to provide Ukrainians for the next months. And one more time, these updates, like about the bad situation, the last time we saw such a big number of updates was somewhere in April or May or March or June of 2022, when the Ukrainians were just building their army and there were just negotiations about upcoming supports. Currently, if you remember a few days ago, I told you, in a month we're going to stop seeing any updates about destroyed Russian vehicles. In 2 months, the Ukrainian army will start running away from their position if the Western countries will not find, if the Western countries are not able to find the way how to support the Ukrainian army. So probably very slowly, step by step, but the entire global collapse of the Ukrainian army has begun. And during the winter military campaign with missiles, this process will be finished, obviously, by the Russian side. Now let's move to Kherson and let's start discussion the situation on the ground. Before that, another video, important video from Odessa area. On this video, we can see how the Russians attacked the ship that entered the Yuzhny port for, according to the grain deal, new Ukrainian grain deal. And after that, we discussed that the special forces of Ukraine occupied this territory and they tried to save as much as possible from that ship, some cargo, maybe, and probably the ship had on board something like military stuff or and so on. Now we are moving to Kherson to Kherson direction. I have as you can see, according to this map, I have adjusted the map because today we got more geolocations. Let's start from the Ukrainian side. The Russians continue bombardments of the village, and the Russians are using FAB 500, the Russians are using missiles, artillery strikes, so they're trying to destroy as many as possible Ukrainians on this foothold. Very heavy explosions. I'm not sure whether anything were able to survive after those strikes, but the Ukrainians continue, and even if nobody survived, obviously the Ukrainians will send more and more forces trying to keep some media victory and some presence of Ukrainians in this village. I have adjusted the map based on two geolocations. First geolocation we got from the Ukrainian side, how the Ukrainian FPV operator attacked the Russian, let's say, small group of 2 soldiers who were trying to evacuate Russian soldier, and the Ukrainians attacked these 2 guys in their back. So this is the geolocation that confirms that at least this area is under Russian control, or at least in the gray zone. The second geolocation we got a little bit to the north or east. On this video we see how the Russian motorcycles were moving along the road, and Ukraine FPV drone managed to get the drivers and to attack them in their back, and as a result of that strike those 2 soldiers were killed. So this is the situation in Kherson. The situation is difficult but stable. So we'll see what is going to be next. Now we are moving to Zaporozhye direction. We also got 2 very interesting updates. First one is coming from the village by the name of Petykhatki. On this video we will not watch this video because of violence, and we condemn any violence in the world, as you remember. The Ukrainians were bombing the Russian forces, the Russian troops in this village with FPV drones, which confirms that probably some part, the bigger part of this village is in the gray zone. So the Russians send something like sabotage group or reconnaissance group. They managed to enter this territory, and in this line they were bombed by the Ukraine FPV drone. So as I understand, this territory I will mark on the map. This area probably is in the gray zone, and there are no Ukrainians, neither Ukrainians nor the Russian soldiers have presence in this part of Petykhatki. Maybe the rest of Petykhatki is under Ukraine control, but this part obviously is in the gray zone. When talking about Zaporozhye area, we see a small operational pause. Today was a very calm day, by the way. We got from the very important updates, some updates about the missiles, about the claims of brigades, but when talking about the situation on the ground, the only active area was the Urozhaine. On this video, we see how the Ukrainians managed to discover local mine depot of mines, ammo depot of mines, and as a result of artillery strike, they destroy it. So this is the video from the area of Kopony, very interesting direction. And the question is, probably the Ukrainians are planning to, if they are planning to do anything ever, they are planning to move further along this line, trying to improve their positions in front of cities like Znistirianka and Kopony. When talking about Zaporozhye, there were no changes during the day since the previous video, just regular clashes, regular bombardments, regular FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian positions, nothing special, just clashes. The Russians reported that as a result of those clashes, the Ukrainians lost 55 soldiers. Now we are moving to South Donetsk direction, and we got a lot of very interesting message updates, if we can call them like this. If you remember, yesterday we've just discussed that Ukrainians during the previous months redeployed significant number of forces from Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Let's say every single Marine brigade was redeployed in direction of Kherson. I'm talking about 35th, 36th, 37th, and 38th brigades. Furthermore, a lot of brigades of strategical reserves were deployed to Kupiansk direction, like 21st, 22nd Mechanized Brigade. Some of them, some parts currently located in Artyomovsk, but whatever. Most of the brigades of strategical reserves and old brigades were redeployed from this area. And currently, as we discussed in the previous video, there is a lack and there is a small holes in defense. And the Russians took a decision to test Ukrainians in this area, and according to just two telegram messages, the Russians launch like reconnaissance and combat in the vicinity of Staromayorsk and Urozhaine. The sources on the ground are saying that the Russians launched artillery preparation, and the artillery preparation was so heavy, as heavy as we saw in Avdiivka on the 10th of October, and now there are very heavy clashes. Currently the second day of clashes, but yet we haven't received even a single video confirmation, neither from the Russian side nor from the Ukrainian one. So let's wait more, and obviously if there are clashes, obviously we're going to see them. The only thing I'll remind you that during October the Russians were improving their positions on the area between Priyutina, Novodarovka, Rovnopol. Basically the Russians managed to secure their flanks, to stabilize the front line, and now the Russians are trying to attack and develop their offensive operation from these fields, as I understand, in direction of Staromayorsk. And of course, if the Russians are able to enter Staromayorsk, obviously the Ukrainian positions in Urozhaine will be collapsed automatically. When talking about area between Ugledar and Novomikhailivka, we haven't received anything during the previous day. Probably the Russians, after they managed to improve their positions, currently try to dig in deeper to get more ammo depots, like to get more ammo, more rounds, to bring some fresh forces. And as I understand, tomorrow or on Tuesday, the Russians will restart their attempts to establish control over the tree lines on the east of Ugledar and to get closer to Novomikhailivka from the north and from the south. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians were concentrated mainly on the artillery positions of Ukrainian forces. As a result of clashes, the Ukrainians lost 80 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system. When talking about Avdiivka, we got some updates, some new details. We continue receiving more and more updates from the southern direction. Today the Russians published the video how they were bombing the village by the name of Toninka using the multi-launch rocket systems. This city was under very heavy fire. We see some Russian focus above this territory. So this is not just a regular military routine or Russian military like things. This is a real focus. focus, and the Russians are trying to suppress the Ukrainian forces, to destroy as much as possible shelters, fortifications. I'm not sure that this is good time to do this right now, because all these things should be done let's say months or 2 months ago. But now maybe the Russians, during the first attacks that took place from 10th till 20th of October, managed to discover a significant number of new positions, and now they're trying to work them out. But I'll remind you that just since November, the Russians published a lot of videos from this direction. We got like destroyed of Ukrainian positions in the farms using the self-navigated missile Lemur. Very powerful, very interesting video, minus Barak on the video. Also, we got that update with the multi-launch rocket system bombardment. Also, we got the usage of FABs in this area. Also, we got from the same direction, from Toninki direction, a lot of destroyed tanks and armed vehicles using FPV drones on the west of this area and on the north of this area. So we see a current Russian focus, and this is not just like to reduce as much as possible the Ukrainians. Obviously, the main goal of all these things is to prepare the Russians for further offensive operation in direction of these two villages. Furthermore, I'll remind you that just this morning, the previous update, we discussed that the Russians brought their demining equipment, distance demining equipment, Ur-77, or people call this system Zmei Gorыныch. On this video, we see the process of clearing the fields with this weapon. So the Russians are trying to get closer. Obviously, there is still a lot of job to do. There are still a lot of fields, but the Russians are on process, and maybe in a week or in 2 they will begin another wave of attack. Meanwhile, the Russians are trying to develop their offensive operation on the north, in the vicinity of Stepova. There are very heavy clashes. Some Russian sources are saying that they managed to bypass another, let's say, 300 meters, and that the clashes currently are taking place on the western part of this village. Furthermore, we got another update of from the Ukrainian side, by the way. This video was made in Krasnogorovka. On this video, we see the Russian stormtroopers on the armored vehicles, personal carriers, were heading in direction of the railways, in direction of Stepova, Berdichi, maybe in direction of Tsirikon, but this, according to the author of this video, all these movements took place in November. The only question I have about this video is why this video was provided by the Ukrainian soldiers, by the Ukrainian sources. Probably we understand that there are just few reasons why the the video material of Russian soldier might appear in the hands of Ukrainian soldiers. Probably something bad happened with these soldiers, and we got some artillery bombardments of Ukrainian positions in the south of Novokalinova. This is a very important video because, according to the previous updates, we got information that the Russians managed to cross the railways to improve their positions on the south of Novokalinova and Keramic. But this video confirms or gives us like insight that probably the Russians, as a result of Ukraine counterattacks or as a result of difficulties to hold this territory, were forced to step back to the south. So this video was geolocated. Maybe this video took place not in November but during October, but we just got this today, so we need more details. And if we continue receiving updates from this territory from the Ukrainian side, of course we will adjust the map and we will move the Russian positions closer to Krasnogorovka. Now we are moving further to Klishchevka and Artyomov's direction. The Russians continue their offensive operation. The Russians continue bombardments and attacks of Ukrainian infantry. Also, the front line was calm during the previous day. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 250 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, and 6 artillery systems. But as you can see, during the day, the combat line were pretty calm. Maybe that were something like operational pause or something like a calm before storm, and updates with missiles maybe tell us that this week the Russians are going to launch another massive attack to collapse the Ukrainian energy facilities, to force the Ukrainians to start strikes all over the Ukraine, to collapse the redeployment of Ukraine's reserves, and I don't know, something big obviously is going to happen, obviously. When talking about Liman direction, the Russians reported that the losses of the Ukrainians from the Ukrainian side were around 210 soldiers. Very heavy losses, but as you can see, during the previous day we haven't received even a single geolocated video. So the clashes obviously are taking place in Bilogorovka, in Kremenaya forest, but we don't know the progress or results of those clashes. In the same situation in Kupin's direction, just the only video we got was the claims of 57th Brigade and the Ukrainians' FPV bombardment of Russian infantry and Russian forces somewhere in the vicinity of Yegorovka and Kislovka-Kotlarovka, so from this area, but without any like details from the ground. But anyway, the clashes here are taking place, but I don't know what is going on the front lines. And that's it for this video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel. Put your likes, join my Patreon.